Good morning. I'm Will Wigmore, and I'm the worship associate today. Thank you for being here. The idea of worthy life was my theme that I came away with, and I could think of many inspiring people: Buddha, Henry David Thoreau, Dylan, both of them, and all the little ones that are out there now. And my mother. My mother was a beautiful and, in some ways, simple woman. She was combed her hair the same way all her life, as far as I could tell. And she would never have worn, like, trousers, just like from that older generation. Once, looking at her thin, flat, pointy shoes, I got her some Nikes. And, she thanked me. And I found them in her closet years later, unworn. Anne Dugan Wigmore, she raised 4 children in the turmoil of life after World War II. My father had been a Navy pilot in the Pacific and joined the New York City Police Department when he returned. And alcohol was how he dealt with what we'd call PTSD. His alcoholism and emotional struggles made life hard for my mother and our fairly large Irish Catholic family. We got through it, though, and it was my mother's strength that allowed that to happen. My mom taught 3rd grade in Catholic school for over 20 years. She did this never having finished high school. I'm told they couldn't afford bus fare to go to high school during the Depression. But she became a gifted and well-loved teacher in the community, and even though my father was now a New York City detective, her salary was crucial to our family. A couple of things I remember about my mom. During East Coast hurricane season, the sky would turn green and the ocean would come right up to the doorstep. And when it got really bad, they brought out the holy candles, which was terrifying. They were like hidden in a box somewhere, and they'd put them in the window. And it was like, whoa, and I was the youngest. So my brothers and sisters and the whole neighborhood were down at the boardwalk and the beach watching the waves. It was great fun. And I was hiding under the table. And, but the real hurricanes was my father coming home from work when he was on a binge. Because you hear about the happy Irish alcoholic, la-di-da. Not in this case. I don't know if that even exists. But it was scarier than a hurricane. My mother got us through that. And she was, somehow, her being solid helped us get through those various hurricanes. And God bless him, he was a good soul. He really was. So that was the hurricanes. Around the 4th of July, there were fireworks. And people lit fires up and down the beaches in the garbage cans, the cage things. And I got scared. It scared me. And I remember have a clear memory. I remember this, telling my mother, call the police and tell them to put out the fires. My father was the police, but that didn't occur to me. So I remember we were in my grandmother's bedroom, and she must have held down the receiver. Hello, police? My son Billy is scared of the fires. Would you please come and have them put them all out? And I was like, thanks, Ma. And that attention made me feel safe. So, thanks, Mom. So another story I remember about my mom was this. We were arguing. It was the late 60s. There were lots to argue about. The war in Vietnam, my long hair, where is Woodstock? Don't join the hippie combine. And so I said something about religion and the strict rules of the church. And I remember my mother was this Catholic school teacher for 25 years. And I said something like religion. She looked at me straight in the eye and says, don't tell me you believe that crap. I was like, what? And she wasn't becoming a UU. That wasn't an option. But she was like a Zen master smacking me. It was like, oh, there's more. There's beyond that. And I really appreciated that. She was just putting me in the moment. And I really love that. It's one of my favorite memories of my mom. After my father passed away, we got her to move to Portland. And she was here for 2 years, and I'm thankful to have had her for that. So the other person whom I consider worthy, is very close to us all right here today. This is someone who preaches gratitude. Gratitude and towels. Be grateful and clean up after yourself. I'm often remiss in practicing gratitude, but it really works. Practice gratitude for what you do have, and don't whine about what you don't have. It's like the Buddha's message: appreciate what's here in front of you. Additionally, and you might know this, you might not know this, but she's really a good dancer. I only saw her dancing a few times, but it made a real impression on me. She was sort of floating. Have you ever seen those dancers on the Buddhist temples? With all those dancers floating around the building, kind of floating, and like Shiva dancing at the heart of the universe. That's how Dolores dances Texas line dancing. And I swear I didn't know there was anything today. I did this weeks ago. Dolores pays attention. She's curious about people. She's curious about and attentive to both new people and old timers. She's very authentic. You feel seen by Dolores. She has empathy and compassion and honesty. And I'm grateful I know Dolores heard. And I apologize for putting you on the spot, Dolores, but there you go. Thank you very much.
Our reading today is from Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. The simple view is that medicine exists to fight disease, and that is, of course, its most basic task. Death is the enemy. But the enemy has superior forces. Eventually it wins. And in a war that you cannot win, you don't want a general who fights to the point of total annihilation. You don't want Custer. You want Robert E. Lee, someone who knows how to fight for territory that can be won and how to surrender it when it can't. Someone who understands that the damage is greatest if all you do is battle to the bitter end. More often than not, these days, medicine seems to supply neither Custer's nor Lee's. We are increasingly the generals who march the soldiers onward, saying all the while, "You let me know when you want to stop." All-out treatment, we tell the incurably ill, is a train you can get off at any time. Just say when. But for most patients and their families, we are asking too much. They remain driven by doubt and fear and desperation. Some are deluded by the fantasy of what medical science can achieve. Our responsibility in medicine is to deal with human beings as they are. People die only once. They have no experience to draw on. They need doctors and nurses, and I might add ministers and family and friends, who are willing to have the hard conversations and say what they have seen, who will help people prepare for what to come and escape a warehoused oblivion that few really want. My dad watched both his parents die long, slow, painful deaths. His mom died of multiple sclerosis in the 1970s when she was 58, and she had been paralyzed from the neck down for years. His dad lived to 84, but was bedbound with dementia for his last few years, with hired round-the-clock caregivers in a lonely apartment. And so it's not surprising to me that in our family, quality of life is really important, and that my dad often jokes about putting a gallon of gas in the boat and heading west. I'm grateful we've had these discussions, and I have a good sense of what he'd want and not want. But I also have a strong sense that we all need help sometimes, and that needing help is not what makes life not worth living. My great Auntie Margie refused Meals on Wheels when she was blind and 93 years old because that's for old people. Auntie Margie, if you don't get to be old at 93, when do you get to be old? As we spoke about last week, we live in an era when people are living longer and longer because medical care is better and better. But while that stops things like infections and childhood diseases and diabetes from killing us, it doesn't stop aging. We all will still die. The question sometimes is, how? As I was writing this sermon on Friday, I was also spending quality time with my dog, Alfie, knowing that at 2 o'clock that afternoon, compassionate care came to my house and put him to sleep. He's 14, he'd had congestive heart failure for 1.5 years and arthritis and liver troubles for longer than that. He hurts and is a much mellower dog than he used to be. But the precipitating event was that on Wednesday night, he had a spontaneous nosebleed that lasted about 25 minutes. And the emergency vet said that with his age and health condition, the most likely cause was a tumor of some kind in his nose. Spending lots of money on diagnosis when we wouldn't put a 14-year-old dog through surgery or chemo seemed wrong. And so we made the decision to let him go. But it was tricky because it was a bit of a gray area. He was not a 1 on a 1 to 10 quality of life scale. He still liked eating very, very much. He can walk around the block, and he still follows me from room to room. But going now lets us have some control, keeps him from what could be a nasty death in the next days or weeks. Stops him from falling down the stairs, which he does regularly now. So on Friday, we gave him all the cat food he wanted and ice cream. And we said goodbye to him a few days or weeks before we needed to keep him from suffering. Obviously, animals are not people. And while I've often said that sometimes I think we treat our pets with more compassion than we treat our elders, I understand that it's very complex. We have Death with Dignity in Oregon, and I've been present twice when congregants have used it. It's peaceful, and with the protections in place that demand that folks have free will about it and that they have a terminal condition, I believe that it's a kind and compassionate option. I know that my congregants who used it wanted to save themselves wanted to have some semblance of control at the end. And I understand that there are some concerns with more extensive choices in dying. Canada's Medical Assistance in Dying or MAID law not only gives terminally ill patients the right to take legally prescribed medication that will end their lives in a painless way, but it allows doctors to administer the medication if a patient cannot or wishes not to. More controversially, Track 2 patients, terminally ill patients, are Track 1. Track 2 patients might not have a terminal illness, but may be suffering intolerably from a medical condition. Well, few of us in theory might state that someone in severe permanent pain might not have a legal right to end that pain. It appears that some folks with treatable conditions feel like they are being encouraged to use MAID, and that the negative consequences of national health care, which is an idea that I fully support, don't get me wrong, is giving patients the idea that there may not be a psychiatric bed available, or that surgery might take 1 year to schedule, but MAID is available now. And that's a gray area. As an article in the Atlantic magazine called "Canada is Killing Itself" points out, the idea of autonomy in medical care, including dying, is a good one, but it can lead to questionable outcomes. The fact is that 1 in 20 Canadians right now are dying with MAID, medical assistance in dying. And that the law is going to change in the next few years with folks with only mental conditions, not physical, eligible for MAID in 2027. Perhaps the most tricky and upsetting part of the law, especially Track 2, is that consciously or unconsciously, it might give the impression that disabled lives aren't worth living. Elena Pott Calabro writes, "MAID advocates dispute the charge that disabled Canadians are being quietly or overtly pressured to consider assisted death, calling it a myth. Even so, this past March, the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities formally called for the repeal of Track 2 MAID in Canada, arguing that the federal government had, quote, fundamentally changed, unquote, the premise of assisted dying on the basis of negative, ableist perceptions of the quality and value of disabled lives, without addressing the systemic inequalities that amplify their perceived suffering." The article continues, Marcia Doherty, a woman who suffers from intense chronic pain, agrees that it should never have come to this, her country resolving to assist her and other disabled citizens more in death than in life. She is furious that she has been allowed to deteriorate, her words, despite advocating for herself before every agency and official capable of effecting change. But she is adamantly opposed to any repeal of Track 2. She expressed a sentiment I heard from others in my reporting, that the relief of knowing an assisted death is available to her should the despair become unbearable, has empowered her in the fight to live. Doherty may someday decide to access MAID, but she doesn't want anyone ever to say she chose it. Dr. Madeline Lee believes in the MAID law, but wants clearer guidelines on when it's appropriate, finding that almost anyone can qualify based on their own assessment of their suffering, which sounds good in theory, but raises many questions in reality. Is a woman who is old and broke a hip a good candidate, even if she's apt to live another 5 or 6 years? Is a man in his 30s with curable cancer who says he doesn't want the discomfort of treatment? She says she believes most doctors are, like her, somewhere in the messy middle, supporters of the law, but wanting clearer guidelines to avoid causing harm. It's that messy middle part I invite us to wrestle with today. Not in the context of assisted death, though you're welcome to consider that as well if you wish, but in the context of how much care do you want before you let go? I am a firm believer in hospice care. I have seen folks who weren't thriving absolutely bloom once their basic needs are taken care of. And I've seen folks who are battling an illness enjoy a much better quality and sometimes quantity of life when they are focused on pain management and quality care and what their goals for living were beyond trying not to die. I am reassured that statistics on where people die are trending back towards home. In 2000, 48% of Americans died in a hospital. And by 2018, that number was down to 35% as hospice care became more common and folks started talking about what they actually wanted. It's incredibly hard for a family who hasn't had these conversations to decline heroic measures. Do everything you can, doctor, is what we are sort of inclined to say when we are surprised. But the truth is that very few people survive CPR, to say one thing. 10% of people with out-of-hospital cardiac arrest survive with bystander-initiated CPR. I would never suggest you not try on a healthy person. A congregant's 20-year-old son was saved when he had a cardiac arrest in a gym and the stranger in the next shower had just taken a CPR class. Yeah. But for older adults, especially those with chronic health conditions, CPR, even in the hospital, can do a lot more harm than good. Fewer than 2% of people with major illnesses, cancer or liver or kidney problems, survive 6 months past CPR. And it can cause broken bones and a lack of blood flow to the brain and other problems, according to NPR. Have the conversations now so you or your loved ones don't have to make those decisions in the stress of the moment. Some of you were here yesterday for Marina McIntyre's memorial service. One of my favorite things about it was seeing so many people from Rose Villa, where she lived. They lived an independent life with choices and autonomy, but they lived in a place where they could also access care. The golf cart drivers drove Marina to meals whenever she wanted. They took her to her groups when she couldn't get there under her own power anymore. Elliot did most of her care until the very end, but she lived in a place that honors elders and provides them with autonomy and community and care. When she needed skilled nursing care after an accident, there was a place on campus she could do that. And when she was able to move back in with Elliot, she was able to do that. And in the last few weeks of hospice, someone came into their home. We all have our own ideas about how we want to age, but I am so grateful for places like Rose Villa. My favorite story from the book, Being Mortal, involves a woman named Susan Block, who is a palliative care specialist, trained in having conversations about what patients want and what's important to them. The book reflects a time when her own father, at 74, a professor emeritus of psychology at Berkeley, was admitted to the hospital with what turned out to be a mass growing in the spinal cord of his neck. Surgery carried a 20% risk of him ending up as a quadriplegic. Not doing surgery would eventually have a 100% chance of him becoming quadriplegic. She flew out, and they spent the evening before the surgery reminiscing and chatting, and she drove off, and suddenly she realized that she had not done what she came to do. And so she turned around, and they had the conversation about what he really wanted. What are your concerns? What kinds of trade-offs are you willing to make? How do you want to spend your time if your condition worsens? You know what he answered? Well, if I can eat chocolate ice cream and watch football, then I'm willing to stay alive. And football on TV, mind you. I'm willing to go through a lot of pain if I have a shot at that. And Block was shocked because she had never known her dad to watch football. But the conversations proved crucial when surgery went really wrong and the surgeons asked her how to handle it. They said, you know, he is definitely going to end up paralyzed from this surgery. And she asked the question, and she said he would be paralyzed, but he could eat chocolate ice cream and watch football, and so she told them to go ahead. He lived another 10 years. He needed constant care, but he also wrote 2 books and 10 articles. Eventually, he became unable to eat and decided not to go to a feeding tube. But the conversation gave Block so much comfort because it was a challenging life, but it was the one that he chose. I am going to invite each of you to spend a couple of minutes writing out the most important things to you on an index card that you got a minute ago. What would make your life worth living? In a situation like that, what couple of things would make you feel like you had a decent quality of life? If you are joining us on Zoom, you can write that by yourself, or you can put it in the chat if you'd like. I won't read them out loud, but you can put them in the chat for each other if you would like. If you are done, and if you would like, you may take a moment to share with somebody sitting next to you. If you don't want to share, you don't have to. I'm going to invite you to take that home and use it to fill out your advance directive if you have not already. If I were a more organized minister, I would have that on a QR code up above me. I do not. I invite you to go home and Google Oregon Advance Directive. You will find the paperwork online. My list is that I want to be able to go outside and I want to be able to communicate with loved ones. I don't need to talk or hear as long as I can communicate in some way. And I'm fine being pushed outside, but that's what's crucial to my own quality of life. Chocolate ice cream is pretty good too. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.